Okay, we're now live. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today on Opera in Conversation. My name is Zelina Viliami. I am the founder president of Oxford Contemporary Opera, and I'm really excited today to be speaking to Edward Gardner, who is the chief conductor of the Bergen Philharmonic, will be the principal conductor of the London Philharmonic Orchestra, was the music director of English National Opera. I've forgotten so many other things, but Ed, thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. It's lovely to talk to you. I wish I could see all of you in person, but it's lovely to be here talking anyway.
Well, I'm sure everyone will really appreciate hearing what you've got to say. So my first question is just, how are you and where are you right now, actually, in terms of the world?
I'm in Bergen. I've been in Oslo. I mean, a lot of the time with my fiance, where, I now divide my time between, in normal times, I would divide my time between Norway and London, where I'm about to start with the LPO, and I have my son, my 11-year-old son. But I've been stuck here in Norway a little bit more than I would have been in ordinary times. But we've been so lucky in this country because the music making has carried on more or less through the 16 months where the rest of the world, dare I say it, and the UK especially, have been so hard hit. And it was really brought home to me when I was back last month for a few weeks, when I went to the CBSO, and they effectively hadn't played to an audience for 450 days, which is, it's heartbreaking actually. But it's heartbreaking, but it was to be there with them, with an audience, was a very regenerative thing too. So the future looks bright.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I mean, obviously it's been, as you say, a really long time now that we've been in various lockdowns and then the pandemic and everything. And I think actually today in the UK, they announced that everyone over the age of 25 can now get their vaccine. So I'm sort of waiting very patiently until it's my turn to go. But I mean, how have you found you've kept yourself going musically throughout the pandemic? Have you returned to any old scores? Have you still been conducting by yourself, or what's the sort of music making that's been happening?
It's a good question. I'm not someone who spends I need the jeopardy. I need the worry of work really to work hard, actually. But I have to say, in the first lockdown, I had such a good time listening to a lot of new music and listening to a lot of people's ideas of what they liked in the world, and not just classical actually as well. My frame of reference was broadened quite a lot, also because of my son, who likes a lot of rock music. So he introduced me to a much more eclectic range of things. But another big thing for me was the LPO is about to celebrate its 90th birthday, and I went through and listened to the whole list of all the LPO commissions over those 90 years, which is pretty extraordinary actually, and ranges from Szymanowski to Kaya Sariaho to James Macmillan. So that was a big diet of music. But the lucky thing and the privileged thing for me was I never really stopped. I mean, I was never really more than, the first lockdown, of course, everyone was off for 4 months. But after that, I was never too far from a performance or thinking about what I needed to plan in the next years. And maybe this is something we talk about more, but COVID wasn't brought to us by some sort of Greek fate, but there is a feeling that there's a little bit of a reset and a rethink about what we need to be achieving as orchestras and opera companies. And I think that I thought about an awful lot, I have to say, over the year.
And what is it you think we should be achieving?
I don't know if I have the answer, but I wonder if audiences' taste will change when we come back. And I wonder actually that the most grand of opera, I wonder whether we'll still have the taste for. I have to say, I think, I don't know, but are we looking for something smaller, more immediate, something more of our time? I don't know, but it's the conversations we need to have and things we need to think about with the people who are in charge of institutions that are giving an audience a diet of music. One of the big pleasures of this last year is that we still commissioned a lot here in Bergen and had a young composers competition, Scandinavian composers competition. So, we're trying to look humbly to the future and what it is that will define an orchestra or an opera company.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sense of, as you say, resetting and rethinking everything has really, I mean, it's a theme that's come up in these, you know, conversations that I've been doing. And I think something for so many people that they found is just that love of returning to, you know, the music, whatever music it is, whether it's, you know, Wagner or Szymanowski or Kaya Sarriah or whatever. I think that joy of returning to music itself has been a really large part of people's sort of lives and, you know, thinking about it and everything. Which kind of leads me to my next question, which is just, how did you get into music? And particularly because this is sort of, you know, an opera series, how did you get into opera? And actually, what is the first opera that you remember seeing?
I got into music because my parents put me in for a choristership at Gloucester Cathedral, where I was a kid, and they didn't have money for a private education. So that was the system was, you got a choristership and you got a free private education, which was, you know, so many of well, boys of my era, but boys and girls now of any era. I mean, there's much more equality in that now, thank God, that, you know, that benefit from that system, whether it's, you know, in London, in Salisbury, in Gloucester. And I sang from the age of 7 till the age of kind of 22, 23, actually, right the way through further education, through music college, for a couple of hours a day, most days, actually. And choir singing and singing is really the basis of my music making. I adore it. And I went away from, having done so much, I went away from it for quite a long time, just in terms of what I enjoyed hearing. But now the sound of a choir, or the sound of, you know, here in Bergen, I work with both small and large, either professional or amateur choruses. And it's really, it's part of my blood, that. And I always wanted to be central to my music making. And I think piano accompaniment was something that I loved from an early age, especially for Lieder. And I thought that's what I would do. And just being with singers and being with the breath of singers and the dramatic shape of singers, of a phrase, of a song, was really fundamental to me. And I think that's how I got into opera, through the voice and through text and the voice.
Yeah, it is so important. And I think it's easy for people to forget that opera is not just the music, it is about everything else. As you say, it's the text, but it's also the staging and, you know, all these different components. But I mean, I think it's just an incredible art form. And I've said this so many times on this series, just how much I love it. And I think from my point of view, as someone who has directed a lot in the past, it's interesting for me to chat to conductors and see how that artistic process is shaped through these sort of two different people working together. I mean, how have you found artistically working with directors? Does it really vary depending on the different directors, or is it more of a sort of universal process?
Totally not universal, and always varies. And what I would say to you is, the great directors I've worked with, it's a completely open dialogue about what they do visually and what I do musically. And it's the most wonderful thing. That is the greatest privilege of my job, even more than working with, you know, great singers, great orchestras. Being in a room with someone who understands dramatic shape and challenges me to rethink is remarkable. And they don't have to be musicians either. That's the really big thing. Some of the people who get temperature of music and temperature of musical drama best are people who can't really look at a score and work out what's going on. And it's a wonder. I mean, to have worked in my life with, you know, Richard Jones, Deborah Warner, David McVicker, these people who really get music, it's really a privilege and an education. And when it works, it's wonderful. When it's an opposition, when it doesn't work, it's not wonderful. And I'm not someone who I can't enjoy it just for itself. I mean, I really need that. I need that friction, but sort of collaborative process with the director for it to be enjoyable, actually.
Yeah, and do you find yourself having certain sort of opinions about the staging and everything and feeding into that, or do you prefer to sort of stick to the notes?
Very much opinions about the staging, yeah. And what I found is that with the people who trust me and I trust them, you know, I'm pretty open about what I think works and what doesn't, and they are too. And that it's wonderful when you can do that, when you can have that. I mean, there's always friction because it's the most beautiful compromise, isn't it? That what we do in opera, and it's something better, something elevated is born out of that compromise when it goes well. But but yeah, I really get involved. Yeah, and in the same way, you know, Deborah Warner taught me so much about the beginning of Fidelia, about how to lower after that overture, how to lower the temperature for that first duet, that first domestic, you know, argumentative, combative, but very domestic duet. And I loved it. I really, you know, these are great people, and we should feed off each other.
Yeah, I think that's such an important part of it. And also, I mean, when you're about to conduct an opera, I mean, what is your process of learning the score? Because obviously some operas, I mean, I can't even imagine the tomes that you must go through to learn a huge opera. But do you have a particular process? You know, how do you go about doing it?
Play, read, some listening. I mean, really, really on and on. And actually, at the beginning of my career, I was quite precious about not listening. But you got to remember, at the beginning of my career, we didn't have Spotify or YouTube. I mean, we probably listened to 2 recordings, so there was a real danger that you just were going down an interpretive, you know, singular route that was rubbish. But now, of course, the wealth of what we can hear from way in the past, you know, from when Strauss was in the room, from when when early 20th century composers were in the room. I mean, really, the archive of recordings is a miracle now. So I don't back away from listening in quite the same way. And then I try to have a clear idea-ish of what I want. I mean, I try to really know it when I meet the singers for the first time. But, you know, I work with great singers, and they have ideas about pieces as well. And, you know, you have that dialogue. I love having a lot of time just with singers at the beginning of the process, and just finding them as people. It's often more about keeping the channels of communication open and the trust developing than it is about pinning things down that early in the process. And every stage you go through as an opera conductor, and I'm sure there's some people watching who've experienced this, there are new challenges all the time. You know, meeting singers for the first time, and their vision of something or their technique of something, into staging rehearsals, into chorus staging rehearsals, into first orchestral rehearsals. I mean, they're tough. And then the first stage in orchestra, where the orchestra is sort of feeling icky in the pit, the singers don't know quite where to sing with the orchestra. It's all, there are a lot of things to go through, but you've got to prepare as well you can. But you only ever feel you know an opera after you've done at least one long run of it. For me, I've never, you know, it's a very famous experienced conductor once said to me, I wish there was a chip in our brains that took away that first time you perform anything, because we're all rubbish at it. Actually, you don't know. You how can you know a piece physically until you performed it with that group of people? It's yeah. So I have to say, one of my great pleasures of getting a little older and doing more is that I get to repeat things, and that's when I really find things out, and when I feel like I really develop. And all through my career, I've been so lucky to do long runs of performances. I remember when I started with Glyndebourne on tour, I did 20 bohèmes in a row. And some people might say, God, you must have got bored. It was the most fantastic experience of my life to do that, to go to different theatres and work out how to corner better, how to build the drama in Act 4 better. It was yeah, to be given that opportunity was a wonderful thing.
And of course, after Glyndebourne, you then went to English National Opera, and you were music director there for a very long time. You've already mentioned your collaboration with the, you know, amazing Deborah Warner, but are there any other highlights that really stick out from that time there?
Yeah, I mean, so many, really. I mean, it's you know, E&O has a kind of mantra of wanting to be as dramatically on the edge of London opera that London opera can be. I mean, that's its calling card, which can be difficult for a musician sometimes, because you know, sometimes you feel as if the concept of a staging is put above the music, which is something which I really don't. I mean, that's not about modernity of productions or anything. I just think that the more I do, the more I realise that if the music doesn't speak, it's lost anyway. And it can be as old-fashioned or modern as you like. It's nothing to do with that. So sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. But when it worked, it was miraculous. And what do I look back on as my favorite things? I mean, all the projects I did with Deborah, Death in Venice, bringing that sort of piece back to life. You know, it hadn't been done in London on stage for a while, and her vision and her advocacy for that piece. All I did with David Alden was you know, from Peter Grimes, Othello. I mean, so many things. All I did with Richard Jones. I mean, these guys are gods. I mean, it was very special, and especially Meistersinger. And you know, he's through his career, he's done a lot of huge Wagner operas, the big spans. You know, The Ring, Meistersinger before he'd already done that in Wales, so that was a wonderful thing. Terry Gilliam, his first operas. You know, well, Maverick that's a very inexact word, but he's an individual, and he has a very strong vision of how he hears and sees things, and no one knew how it would work, and then it worked fantastically. He was one of the most musical people I've ever met. His instinct for music was remarkable. So yeah, it gave me a lot. I mean, one thing I look back on is that I was really young to do it, and I think at that age I could give it a lot of energy. I mean, it really was my life's focus. But so in some ways, I wish I was there now and able to do more, to help singers and help the process. And you know, if it wasn't quite working, find ways of manipulating it. I think it's a lot to take on a big company like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what are some of the challenges that music directors of opera houses face today, do you think? Obviously, apart from, you know, the pandemic and everything.
Yeah, the pandemic is key, isn't it? And it's so interesting to see what companies have done to keep their spirit, you know, their ghost alive during this last year and a half, and some hugely successfully. I mean, it was a little while ago, but I was incredibly moved by my old opera company's Bohème up at Alexandra Palace. I thought it was a brilliant achievement, and people tried to be snobbish about it, but I could see no reason to be snobbish about it at all. I thought the values were really high, and projected in a new way, and you know, it had a little sort of thread of inclusivity with it as well. I thought it was really beautiful. I mean, generally, there's a big question you asked. What the challenges of music directors? I mean, I can tell you what I found difficult. I mean, because a music director is these big companies are. I don't know. It's because all companies are different and different sizes, but it was a behemoth, you know. I mean, the number of people who were there is. I mean, it's until you've experienced it, it's kind of it's completely overwhelming. I mean, I guess 200 musicians on staff, more or less, all the stage management, and you feel like you want to centralize their energy and look after the kind of long-term health of the company at the same time, and it's really tiring. And what I found most difficult, if I'm honest, is having to be a manager in that way and manage this thing and make difficult decisions, and then be in the pit and be a colleague and performer. Those two things side by side are pretty hard, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't imagine doing it myself, and because it just seems like a huge task. But I think just talking about ENO then, I mean, they are well known, especially recently, for really doing amazing work in terms of particularly attracting younger audiences. For example, they've recently announced an under 18s go for free scheme. But this seems to be a sort of, you know, ongoing issue in opera, is sort of how do we attract younger audiences? And I was wondering if you think that there is something inherent about opera that has a problem with attracting younger audiences, or is it just the way that it's sort of framed and sort of perceived by other people?
Yeah, it's a question we've all asked ourselves as long as we've been thinking about it. In some ways, I reject the premise and just say age is kind of irrelevant, and people come to opera at times when they're ready for it. And some people, I wasn't particularly young. I mean, you asked me before, I never answered your question what my first opera was. It was at ENO, and it was actually Mikado, which I kind of liked, and then it was Lady Macbeth by Shostakovich, which I loved. You know, that was a very special thing to go to as a 14-year-old. So I wasn't hanging around opera houses when I was 6 and 7. You know, it wasn't. And I honestly think if I wasn't a musician, I'd have come to it more in my 30s than my 20s. You know, I don't have I think our obsession with trying to appeal to this concept of young people who are apparently a subset of society. I mean, it's so reductive to everyone, to us, and to a whole range of people that I don't know. You know, put on good work which is immediate and passionate, and that you're passionate about, and people will find you. And you don't have to be so specific about you know, what age they are, I think. But the opportunity to see it, this is the thing, isn't it? And you know, I benefited when I was young from seeing, I mean, it was £5 at Covent Garden up in the gods, or any tickets they had available. It's probably like 40 quid now, but I don't know. But it's, you know, with the inflation. But I think what E&O are doing is brilliant, because there are going to be a whole load of people who go along, and for some people they'll hate it because it's just not in their world, and it never will be. And there'll be some people who, if it's a seed which they'll come back to, and there'll some people who love it. Brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you think that, because I think there is definitely this problem of opera companies seeing, as you say, young people as a sort of alien subsect of society, completely divorced from other people. You know, sort of how do you identify the different types? But I think also, I mean, across this pandemic, there's obviously been, you know, I think unsurprisingly, a huge rise in political movements and awarenesses of movements like Black Lives Matter to #MeToo to increasing awareness of the environment. And this has sort of been reflected, I think, in opera companies quite recently. So going off that, I mean, do you think there is something about opera which is inherently political, or do you think it has a responsibility to be political?
Yeah, God, again, something we all think about all the time now, isn't it? About this, and about how art reflects the times we're in. I think composition of opera, I think the time we're in is the time we're in, and the composers and librettists are going to write operas that is about where we are now, and that's wonderful. I mean, I would point everyone to a brilliant article Mark Rylance wrote for the Guardian a couple of I guess last week about how, you know, plays now need to be about ecology and about the world we're in, and this is what we should be focusing on. Art needs to reflect the world we're living in and what we're going through, and that, I mean, that's the same thing. You know, you said Black Lives Matter. I think there's going to be a lot of material that's written now about you know, about the times we're in, and about the struggles we have as a society, and about how we develop a society. Absolutely right with that, and so interested to talk to composers and librettists about that right now, and you know, with plans for the future. The difficulty actually is, for me, is how we deal with music that isn't of our time. You know, and there's a huge discussion about what's, you know, the statues of society and the emblems of the past. You know, about how going forward we interpret them for ourselves in our time, what we accept from the past and what we don't accept. This is really tricky, and this is going to be a very difficult conversation, I think, for the next 20 years. I think it's a generation of conversations we're going to have about how to, and I'm not going to, you know, I want to be humble in that. I don't have a guiding light, but society as a whole will come up with a definition of what it's prepared to see and what it's sorry, I just lost you.
Yeah,
so there we go. for what it's prepared to see, and for what it's prepared to feel and hear from the past. But it's going to be a long old discussion.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think tackling those older works of the past, which obviously contain certain, you know, themes or depictions which are sort of just not acceptable in today's culture, I think it's so interesting. I mean, do you think that some operas shouldn't be performed then, because they do have these really uncomfortable settings and uncomfortable depictions, or do you think we should just sort of be trying to put new light on them?
I don't know if I can give you a black and white answer to this. I mean, if you told me that Otello was either the play or especially for the opera, which I adore the music of, and I think it's a beautiful, sensitive psychological drama. If you told me that could never be, it was too imbued with difficulty to be performed in the future, I would be really sad. Weirdly, I'd be less sad about some Mozart operas, which I think are bizarrely just crudely misogynistic, actually. But that's my personal. I mean, that's probably because I love Verdi more than some Mozart operas, more than Così fan tutte, probably. But so I don't know. Would I be sad? The thing I dislike most. Let me digress in order to avoid answering your question. The thing I loathe most is putting an opera on and then undercutting it in order for it to fit with our times. That for me is not a solution. To make fun of an opera or weaken it from a viewpoint that was never intended. That's the one thing that I think is not interesting to me.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think just also on this topic of sort of new opera or new music, and how we kind of just deal with things like the pandemic. I mean, something else that we've seen obviously is a huge rise in digital performances and stream performances online, which I know that you've done partly with the LPO, who've done an incredible concert series. I can really recommend it. But is this something else that you're interested in? Is it something that you think we'll be seeing a lot more in the future?
No, I'm not interested in it. Fundamentally, I think it's great that we've done it, and if it gives people an energy and a sort of a feeling of what we do in real life, I think the LPO have done this really well, and it's the orchestra's lit. There's more movement than normal. It's not just like a fixed fourth wall. I think our guys here in Bergen have done them really well, but to me, it's treading water. I think the day we lose that the kind of extraordinary communion of being in the room together as an audience and performers, with acoustic sound, with that sound that's vibrating in the room and overwhelming, and the experience that's only shared by the people in the room for that evening. If that gets lost, I think we're all sunk. Actually, that's for me. That's all what it's all about, and it's something I've thought about a lot, because it's every generation now has lost its connection with acoustic sound. We all have amazing stereos in our headphones, TVs, whatever, that are pumping out amplified process sound. And the optimist in me thinks that there'll be more call for it the more we have this as a kind of mecca, as a sort of these cathedrals to beauty that the concert halls are. It's not about being reactionary and being old-fashioned. There's something we need. We need that, like we need birdsong. We need something in our lives that will really, generate that. There's something about humanity, and so I'm proud of what everyone's done in this last year for that. But it's not what, for me, it's not what it's about.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think everyone is just craving live performance at the moment. I mean, this is more just from a curiosity point of view, but I mean, how did you find it as a conductor doing these sort of live stream performances without an audience? I mean, was it just completely different?
Yeah, it's completely different. And I talk with my colleagues in London and in Bergen as well. We're not used to finding an energy that's not connected to the people in the room. People often say that orchestra sits very still, but actually there's an energy in the room that you can feel. It crackles with intensity, even if there's a stillness or there's a uniformity about it. And I think it's very hard to transfer to the screen. Maybe less so for I think of some chamber orchestras who really have a thing about a kind of physicality and a movement. And I think it's hard for us as orchestras. It's not about being emotionally restrained. It's just about the way that we deliver. It's delivered through instruments and through a whole. And I think it's difficult. I think it's hard. And we all got used to it more and more over the last year and a half. But it's not our first métier. It's not what we do fundamentally.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I think it's wonderful that you are now, I think is it as of September that you're the principal conductor of the LPO?
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah. So I mean, I think, I don't want this to sound like a negative question, but why are you coming back to London when there's all sorts of negative things happening in the UK right now with, Brexit and God knows what else? What is it about London that you really want to come back to?
Um, Very good question. And it wasn't so long ago that I'd left, having done a job which turned my hair grey over for 10 years. So it's a very good question. When we started talking, I asked myself the same question. I mean, coming back for a world-class orchestra is a pretty good start. But do you know what? I thought further about this, about what it is to be a London orchestra, because what I'd found that had really there's a feeling that had intensified me in the years I've been away from London. It was the role of an orchestra within a community. I mean, this city I'm in is completely improbable in Bergen because it's 300,000 people. So it's the size of Northampton, but it's got this world-class orchestra here. So you feel, there's lots of money in Norway, obviously. So these things can be supported. But aside from that, you feel that there's a community around the orchestra, and the orchestra is delivering primarily for the people in that city, whether it is the school's concerts or the subscribers or whatever. But you feel, and that connection to the city I was in was really important to me. That's really hard in London because it's a transient city, it's an international city. There are lots of options for everything you want to do: orchestra, opera, restaurants, art galleries, whatever it is. And how do you define yourself in London? But I think there's a way of doing it, and I think we're coming at a point, even pre-pandemic, where I was thinking about this whole deglobalization and about localization, not traveling all the time, about coming to a place for its essence, for being essentially rooted somewhere, and that's what really attracts me about the LPO, and it's London audience, and building an audience within that part of London, within the South Bank and further south. And we're going to be building a rehearsal venue and a smaller arts venue alongside the festival hall. And I would love that was used to put the roots of the orchestra deeper into the city in that area. And then you have that orchestra for the community again. Why these institutions were formed in the first place. So that, once I started thinking on those lines and tying it in with the world-class orchestra that the LPO undoubtedly are, I started to get really excited for myself about it.
Well, as someone who is a Londoner, I'm very glad that you are coming back. I think it's a very exciting time. I just want to pick up on one thing that you said just now, which is just, I think, suggesting that maybe things are going to get a tiny bit less international. I mean, obviously the pandemic has provokes that anyway. But I think just going back to opera, it's obviously such an art form which really relies on a lot of international travel with, singers from all over the place being brought in. Is that something that you think is going to reduce a bit in opera, or is it going to continue in different ways? I mean, what do you think about that?
I really think it all needs to reduce. And I think it's not the sort of travel I don't have a problem with is if a singer goes to New York to sing 3 productions and stays there for an autumn. I think that's kind of the world, and I think all travel is going to have to be justified, and I think swanning around week by week, jetting across the Atlantic is not acceptable. And I think my dream is that we all root ourselves more seriously in individual places for longer times, and singers do turn up for rehearsals. Don't come in for the dress rehearsal in big international opera houses, and you're embedded in a community, and that's my dream for the future. I think I think the big orchestras are going to have to be they're going to have to make really enlightened decisions about what touring is as a thing. Is it acceptable in the future to go to China and do a few concerts and then fly back? I think over the next years we'll all be thinking about if we're touring, are we really giving something back to the community we're in? Are we staying long enough that we're making a lasting effect and not just seeing the inside of a hotel and a concert hall? Yeah, and I really, they're difficult conversations, but now's the time to be having them. And actually, this was, for me, this was all pre-pandemic as well. I really, this was coming ecologically and in many other ways. So yeah, now's the time to be looking at how this has all changed in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I am just aware of time, so I'm going to actually turn to some questions from our audience. The first one is very much kind of after just what we've been discussing, but what would be your advice to young conductors starting their careers now, especially with things like COVID and Brexit to sort of think about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping, no one knows, but I'm really hoping Brexit won't be a block to people's work and starts of careers, especially. I think, I mean, I could imagine that the kind of weekly travel within Europe is going to be difficult for orchestras and people, but I'm really hoping that doesn't become a big obstacle. Of course, the last 16 months has been so hard for the people just starting their careers. That's the group of musicians I kind of try and think about most, because it's sort of heartbreaking just when you're starting on a journey. For me, it's just having as much experience and doing as much as possible, and it doesn't matter whether it's with a brass band or a local choral society or your college orchestra. Just get in front of a group of people and learn how to communicate and make music and develop. That for me is what it's all about. And really, don't be afraid to write to people. No one's ever offended to get a letter saying, can I watch or can I talk to you? They may not be able to, they may not have the brain space or time, but no one is ever offended. And I wish I'd done more of that when I was young, but whenever I did, people answered. It was really, there's a lot of people out there who are happy to talk. It's pretty lonely being a conductor actually a lot of the time, and it's quite nice to talk to another conductor of any stage or age about what you do. So don't be shy about that kind of thing.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Our next question is, do you still get nervous? And if so, how do you deal with nerves when you're going on stage?
I don't get terrible nerves, actually. I'm really lucky. It's part of the beauty of not facing an audience and not playing an instrument. It's marvelous. But the most nervous I can get is when I meet an orchestra for the first time. So it's not about a performance, actually. It's about that. It's about the communication with an orchestra and the trust, because you never know what's going to happen. You never know what the atmosphere is, or what they'll take, or what they won't take. That first morning of a rehearsal week is tough for me. And then sometimes it's the unexpected, isn't it? So it's often in opera, actually, when you don't know, when a singer's as nervous as one, you're trying to find your way around that can be, first nights of opera can be a little nerve-wracking, I guess, but just stay in the music. I mean, stay in the moment, I think is stay in the now is a very good way of avoiding it. And but I can't say I've ever really got detrimentally too nervous.
Excellent. Our next question is a slightly strange one, but do you find conducting opera or symphony orchestras more challenging? And if so, well, which one, why, basically?
I don't know if I can answer that question, but it's definitely different. It's really different. I mean, with a symphony orchestra, the challenge is you have to set out. I mean, if you go to America and work with one of those great orchestras, you have 2.5 hour rehearsal one day, 4.5 hours the next day, and then the next day is a concert day. So you cannot hang around. You need to set out what you are and who you are within 20 minutes, or it kind of doesn't work. That's hard. That's really hard. And sometimes you don't know what you are or who you are. It can be really difficult. Opera's the other, isn't it? It's a slow burn up to a point. You're investing in one project, often for 3 months of your life, through to the last performance, within rehearsals to performances, and you're managing other people. You're managing a lot of things. You're managing singers' needs, expectations, demands, physical demands with the production, an orchestra and chorus. You manage a lot of unknowns, and they're both really hard. don't know what to say.
No, I think that's all you can really say. Is there an opera that you've not yet conducted that you'd still like to do?
Millions, and that's the thing about being a conductor. You'll never conduct everything you want to. It's a beauty and a frustration of the job. But ring cycle for sure. I never got a chance to do it. You know, some of the Janaceks I haven't yet done. Jennifer, that's really high on my list. And then Don Carlos, Verdi's Don Carlos would be really high for me. But many actually.
Yeah, I think it's sort of just impossible. It's like when you think about how much music you listen to, and you realize it's impossible to listen to everything that, you know, someone ever wrote or you know, a band has ever produced. It's sort of, yeah, there's so much out there.
Yeah.
So what are some operas that you couldn't live without?
Do you know the opera I really couldn't live without, that sticks in my head? I have sleepless nights when I do it, is Onegin. I think there's something of the quintessence of opera in that piece.
Yeah.
Beauty, vulnerability through a voice and through miscommunication, and incredible sweeping lyricism, but always with his underlying vulnerability. I find it that I think it's the best. I really do. I think it's, you know, you could do. I mean, there's incredible art and beauty in Wagner and Verdi, but Onegin is the one. Yeah, for me.
Yeah, I think excellent choice. I agree with that.
Isn't it funny how Tchaikovsky went through this period of? Actually, what's really interesting to me is these dips and flows of composers and who's accepted and loved and cherished and who isn't. Tchaikovsky went through a long period of being thought of as kitsch and over romantic, which to me is remarkable. I mean, because he has this. I think he sums up something in music that I think no one else could or can. I really, yeah, there's something miraculous about his music.
Yeah, there's really something there. I think every time I listen to Onegin, I just either just completely in floods of tears, or just there's something so special about it, isn't it? Just yeah. We've sort of already touched on this in our conversation, but since joining ENO in 2006, 2007, what do you think are some of the biggest changes you've seen in opera over that time?
I think I mean, some companies haven't changed much, but I think there's people are searching for an immediacy of message, aren't they? In a variety of ways. I think there's a need to connect with the audience and not just think that you can put on shows and expect people to have an engagement or not even a knowledge of what you're trying to do. You see that, and I mean, I'm really proud of what my old company does with its. You know, it's done a lot with. It's developed its education work and its community work a lot over the last year, actually, which is pretty remarkable in the pandemic. But I guess there's a even with companies who are still quite traditional and do traditional repertoire, I think you feel there's a humility about their relationship with the audience, or an increasing humility about engagement. Engagement is a lazy word, isn't it? About the relationship between the two, and about how to enthuse people about the art form, or you know, how to bring young composers, young singers through. Everyone's starting to try. I think I get that impression.
Certainly. This next question, I understand if you don't really want to answer it, but Sir Antonio Pappano is obviously leaving the Royal Opera House after being there for 20 years. And so the position of music director at the Royal Opera House is open. Are you going to be throwing your hat into the ring?
No, because there's no way I could do. I have an orchestra for the next 5 years in London, and I'll be really all my London energy will be going towards them. So there's no way I could do it.
Yeah, I think it'd be pretty impossible to do both at the same time. Sort of running.
I mean, what he's done, he's really the model of a music director, and he's given that orchestra so much, and an opera company so much love, and he's been central to them, and he's been there, and whoever they get next, and they deserve someone great, needs to be there with them, and I'll be with the LPO looking after them.
Yeah, you'll be down the road, just sort of.
Exactly. Yeah.
So this is just our last question, and it's a bit of a sort of joke one. But if you could go back in time and talk to one composer, who would you talk to, and what would you ask? If you had, say, 20 minutes to talk to someone.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because often the greatest thinkers are the worst communicators. So it's quite a difficult question to answer. Do you know what? I'd love a night out with Berlioz. I think that would be a lot of fun. I've got to say. I think he'd be wild and a lot. He'd be really, yeah. That would be my answer.
Yeah, I think solid answer. Yeah. That is all we've got time for today. But Ed, thank you so much for joining me. It's truly been a delight to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Great. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Yes, I think we're going to have a bit of a hiatus right now in Opera Conversation, and then we'll be joining you back with a lot more guests in the near future. But in the meantime, all of our talks are on the website or YouTube channel, and you can get in touch with us via our website as well, which is just oxfordcontemporaryopera.com. I've been Selena Vulliamy. This is Opera in Conversation. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching.